Good afternoon, everyone. It is November the 7th, 2024. Welcome to Scouching Live. You'll note that I am alone at the moment, but we are going to be joined by Scott Wheeler in a matter of minutes. I hope he is currently at another engagement, but he will be here. We got a wonderful show planned with him. We're going to be talking a lot about the NCAA and the CHL, who are currently, I believe, as we speak, just going into a meeting to hash out some details about what potentially there could be in terms of an agreement between those two organizations. We'll see, but Scott knows a lot more about this than I do, and so we're gonna be talking about that when he pops in here as well. Scott Wheeler also has his first real ranking of the year. I know he put one out a few months ago, but the first one, While Players Are Playing Hockey, came out, I believe, on Monday. So we're going to be taking a look at that, talking about some players that we both wanted to highlight as well. So welcome to the show. I, of course, am joined by the illustrious producer, Mr. AJ. How are you,
Wow,
sir?
my intro gets better every week, it feels like, or
Oh,
every show. I appreciate it.
Of course. How could it not?
And I see Rayanne is already in the chat, serving
Just
up
trolling.
terrible questions.
Serving terrible questions, yeah.
We love you,
already.
Rayanne. Great thumbnail, but terrible questions. That's why you are off the show for the most part, and we are on it.
Yeah.
But we love you.
Hey, the one time he made an appearance, it was funny.
It was funny.
I enjoyed that. Yes, I enjoyed that.
Exclusive
But anyway,
Evan Bouchard content. Who would have thought?
Yeah, exactly. Only here. You heard it here first. But in any case, so Scott's going to hop in here in a few minutes.
I do want to note that it will be a hot join, so we might have some audio issues off the top with him coming on, but I will do my best with my smooth brain to figure out all the issues that could arise.
Oh, speaking of which, speak of the devil.
And there we go.
Here we go. Are we Are we coming through? How are we doing?
Yeah, you guys are good. Am I all right here?
Yes, you are. I believe we are, Mr. Producer. How are we?
Everything is good. So
all right.
I will take a back seat now, and to our viewers, enjoy the show.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Well, welcome to the show, Scott. Nice to see you. It's been a little while. So I do want to start by saying that also, everybody, welcome Scott Wheeler to the show. Hello. I do want to say that before the show, my producer gave me a bit of an anxiety attack by posting and making it sound like you had some thoughts about my chosen son, Porter Martone, for the year. You were asked about him in a Q&A earlier this week about him being potentially overrated.
Yeah.
And I did want to, before we get into this NCAA agreement, I have gotten this question about him a little bit over the course of the season, and I think I know my answer, but I am curious about your take. I read your answer in here, but I'm curious about your take on the physical maturity, the size, the physicality in his game, maybe being a bit of a cautionary tale, but I know you have him at 2 on your list, but I'm curious of a Cole's notes of your answer to that question.
Yeah, so the question was sort of built around what context does the age piece of the puzzle, him being a late 06, and what context does the size piece of the puzzle warrant, and how much weight should each of those things be given in terms of not just his production this year, but his play last year, his play at U18s, et cetera, et cetera. And my answer to it was kind of twofold. I just did a feature that came out last Friday, so 6 days ago now, on Porter Martone, and in doing that, got to know a little bit about him and also got to be around him a little bit more. I'd spent some time with him at both of the last 2 U18s and had been around him at the rink in Mississauga prior to this year, but it was sort of my first couple of times out to see him with the team now in Brampton. Just got to see him physically, and the first thing that jumped out to me was obviously he looks bigger and stronger this year and yada, yada, yada. He's a big kid. He's almost 6'3". He's over 200 pounds. But he didn't strike me as a finished product in the way that some other kids who have that weight and that kind of size have in the past. Cole Beaudoin, for example, when I saw Cole Beaudoin last year, it was like, this kid looks tapped out. Like, this kid's a physical specimen. He's way beyond all of these kids physically in terms of his athletic maturity and his makeup. Porter doesn't give me that vibe. I still see in Porter, just anecdotally in Porter's frame, it felt to me like there's still more room add there. And then in speaking with people around him, that seems to be the consensus view, is that despite the fact that he's bigger and stronger than a lot of the players he's playing against right now, and could look like an NHL player if you sort of teleported him into an NHL locker room tomorrow, he might play at 215, 220. Like, he might be closer to where Matthew Nyes is in terms of weight. Like, he might just be a big, thick kid, and he's not there. He's not sort of fully there yet. So that was a part of it. And then the other piece in terms of why I'm at 2 on him, and I wasn't heading into the year, it should be noted, I saw him play some pretty bad games last year with Mississauga, games where I left the rink thinking, that kid's not the second best kid in this draft class. That kid's not going to challenge James Higgins. But this year, I just think he's found another level. He certainly began to show signs of that at U18 Worlds. Now, it's easy to look good playing with Gavin McKenna. Yes. But he did look like he belonged with Gavin McKenna in many of those games, and actually looked like the better player in a couple of those games. So all of that has just started to add up, some really, really positive viewings. He's just taking over games this year, and he can do it in so many different ways. So that has kind of sold me more on him as this season has started here, relative to, say, where I was at on him a year ago, which viewed him as more of a top 5 guy than a top 2 or 3 guy. He looks good, and
does, yes.
And the points are starting to pile up, and the way that he's doing it with skill. He's doing it with a clear shot. I mean, the shot has always been there, but his ability to score from mid-range. I think it's interesting that a 6'3", 200-pound kid plays the point and the sort of the flank, the half wall on the power play, and really the power play there runs through him. He's not a bumper guy. He's not a net front guy. He's not a goal line guy. And the toe drags and the little skill plays that he's now making on a more consistent basis, on top of the size and the physicality and the way that he gets himself and his teammates involved in games, that has become much more consistent. I saw glimpses of it last year, but I actually didn't think he was as sort of mythically competitive and the leader type that people maybe saw last year. I think I've come around on that a little bit. Plus it's hard to ignore the production as well. I think that will come back down to earth. Him and Misa aren't going to finish with 140 points.
Yeah, that's
but in saying that, they now look like they're on a track where maybe they can touch 115, 120. And it's been a while since we've seen that from the non-Bedard types, right? Like, I look back on McDavid's year. Marner had 120 points that year, and guys have done it since then. Obviously, Dylan Strome did the same thing. Alex DeBrincat did the same thing. There was a time where a lot of guys were doing that, and it's become harder to do that across all 3 levels in the CHL. But we've got 2 kids in the O this year who I think have a real chance to get there. And it's been nice to see both of those kids take some important steps. Misa included has taken some really, really important steps this year.
Yeah, totally. I mean, largely, I totally agree with you. And I mean, just for the record, Porter Martone is on a 7-game point streak. And in the last 10 games, he's got 20 points. So he's just ripping through the OHL right now. I've seen him in person a few times this year. I've also seen Misa. I think you're right about the point production. I think that it is really nice to see these guys doing what they're doing, especially because it has been a little bit of time. And I do think that the top end of this class, like, you can talk about maybe further down the board, and I'm sure we will, but those first few names, especially the Canadians, I think are really, 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 really solid, strong case players. Like, they're just really, really good. And I think Martone is a guy who, it's like a collection of little things that he just does so well. He like you said, he's got the shot, he's got the skill, he's got the size. And if you sort of scale back his height a little bit, he's around like the equivalent of a 6 foot, 185, 186 pound kid, which, yeah, I totally can see him putting on another 10 pounds, 15 pounds and being this rock of a hockey player with skill and lots of potential. So glad to know you're on the hype train a little bit. And I agree. I think, yeah,
I'm just going to look it up quickly here, but I'm curious what Corey Perry and the Tkachuk brothers play at, because those were the 3 names that several people in my story sort of tabled to me. And I don't love to get into the comparable weeds with a lot of these kids, especially this early. Yeah, so Perry's 208. I'm sure the Tkachuk brothers are above that. Certainly Brady's above that.
Yeah.
But it does feel like that's kind of what you're looking at here.
Yeah, which is not so bad. And yeah, I agree. Both of those guys, I think, have taken big steps, especially Misa. I mean, we don't need to harp on about Michael Misa here, but I thought I watched him in Saginaw, or not in Saginaw, but in London playing with Saginaw, and he's such a masterfully subtle player that just gets it. And I think that the speed of his game has really taken a ramp up. His puck touches are way quicker and smarter, and he's just getting the job done no matter where he is on the ice and what he's doing. And I just think that that's just every time he stepped on the ice for Saginaw, I'm going, he's driving the bus, even though he's not the fastest or the most skilled guy on the ice. It doesn't matter. Like, nothing London did really sort of slowed him down a little bit. I mean, I don't know, maybe we touch on him a little bit before getting into the NCAA here, but yeah, like in your mind, he's taken a jump as well. So what is it that you're seeing in him as well?
Well, I think part of it is the move back to center. He was obviously developed and played as a center in minor hockey all the way up. He played about, I'd say, a quarter of his games through the first 2 seasons of his career down the middle. Their plan, in talking to Chris Lazary during both of those seasons, was always for him to spend his full draft year back at center. But they were in obviously a unique situation in Saginaw, where Matthias Sapovalev, Hunter Haight, then Owen Beck, they had among the best centermen in the league. And as a result, they were chasing championships. They were trying to be competitive. And it just made more sense to have a young player like Misa play the wing. Now that he's down the middle, A, it activates his speed more. B, he gets touches lower in the offensive zone. It kind of reminds me, and I think there are some parallels between the two players, though I think Misa is a much more well-rounded player at this age, but it kind of reminds me of the move that Brad Lambert made back to center in the WHL after he was sent back to the WHL to spend half a year there and chase a WHL title and go to the Memorial Cup. Brad just started to sort of work and involve himself more in games. And that's what scouts wanted to see from Misa last year. The skill and the skating and the craft. He's a competitive kid. I don't think people didn't think he was a competitive kid, but people wanted to see him own it and take over games and get to the inside and just take charge on the ice more than he did last year. And now Saginaw is his team and he's playing like it's his team. And just that opportunity, the fact that he's the go-to guy there, the fact that they've lost a little bit of depth and it just gets to be him, I think that's been really, really positive for him. And I think there was a time in the Memorial Cup even last year where he was a little upset with how he was being used and sort of the third line role that they'd played him in. And he wanted to be playing higher in the lineup and he felt like he should be playing higher in the lineup. And I think he even considered, I think both him and Zane Perek considered going elsewhere this season and sort of playing, sort of requesting a trade, quote unquote, or I think Saginaw considered a full restart. And then once they got Chernyshov, it sort of recalculated, I think, things for them. They got Hay back. All of that sort of said to them, I think, okay, well, if why don't we just hang on to Zane and Michael and try to maybe not go for it, but try to be a competitive team still, which is pretty rare after winning the Memorial Cup. So, and they are a competitive team.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, it's been fun to sort of watch him, but I think it really just comes down to him. He's attacking the inside more. He's playing a little harder. He sprouted up from 5'11" to 6'1" last year, and I think that sort of changed a little bit for him. He had to figure that out. But the center ice, getting more touches and more involvement in the game, I think has been huge for him.
Yeah, I mean, just for the record as well, he had his first game where he didn't have a point in the last game he played on November 3rd. So up until then, he was riding a point streak. And he earns everything to me. Like he is the guy there. And it is really, I mean, they have guys like Zane Perek as well, but he really seems to glue that whole roster together when he's on the ice. It's pretty wild. So yeah, definitely with you on that one. So the story of the day, and I believe the meeting is occurring literally as we speak.
It is.
The NCAA and CHL are hashing out some sort of an agreement to make this more of a thing, more of an official thing. But you're more dialed in on this than I am. I've heard some things. I've spoken to some people, but you're working on things with the Athletic on this. So why don't you take it away and give us a quick rundown on what's going on?
Yeah, so I've spent the better part of the last 2 months, really, when we knew that they were going to begin discussing it in earnest officially at their October meeting, and that they might even vote at their October meeting. Obviously, the Division I Council then punted it to their November meeting, really began working the phones. I've spoken with 40 people from across the CHL, USHL, BCHL, U Sports, USA Hockey, NCAA, about this. We're going to have a huge feature out hopefully today, if and when the vote passes, which it is expected to. But the outcome here is twofold. A, the professional status that has been assigned to major junior players in Canada will be removed as a result, beginning August 1st, 2025, the sort of August window, they will begin to commit to teams. And then beginning next season, we will see former CHL players playing NCAA hockey. And then twofold on top of that, they're also going to change language about pre-enrollment activity to align ice hockey with other sports in college hockey. In other sports, players in golf and tennis, for example, are allowed to participate as amateurs in professional events. They're allowed to even be paid by some sponsors to go to those events, as long as they're not taking home the kind of salary that we see on professional tours in those sports. It's permissible pre-enrollment and even sometimes during their off seasons from school for some of those players to play. The move in language, my understanding of the move in language with the NCAA is that they're going to add contracts and rookie tournaments and things like that to permissible pre-enrollment activity, which will open up for the first time in a very long time the option for NCAA players to play in rookie tournaments in September. It will potentially even open up the opportunity for signed players on NHL contracts to play college hockey as long as they haven't been paid out signing bonuses and been paid for those contracts. It will then likely require that the NHL makes a move to allow NCAA entry-level contracts to slide like they do in the CHL. And the ripple effect of that is that the CHL may lose some first and second round picks. I think heading into this process, the CHL just expected that the rules around contracts would stay the same and that players who are signed would remain ineligible from playing in college hockey. And that may still end up the case if the NHL decides to step in and sort of land on the CHL side on this. But the NCAA ruling, by the sounds of it, is going to allow it. And as a result, not only will the top 20-year-old players potentially leave the CHL, or 19-year-old players after they've graduated high school potentially leave the CHL and go to college hockey as the next step in their development path. But we could also see first round and second round guys who sell tickets and CHL clubs are reliant on also depart. So really two changes in the language. The one about making CHL players eligible has been the talking point, but there's also some really important language changes that the NCAA is considering here today. And if they make them, the CHL-NHL agreement is going to have to be reopened. The NHL-CBA, which is up for renegotiation in September of 2026, could potentially need to be reopened sort of before that. And this wave of players that we have seen sort of begin to start to go back and forth between the USHL and the CHL is going to ramp up. Kids are going to leave the USHL to play in the CHL so that they can continue their paths in the CHL, knowing that they can then still play NCAA hockey. And on the flip side, you may see some players go the other direction. I think ultimately the sides that are going to be hurt in all of this are pretty clearly the BCHL and the Junior A loops in Canada. And obviously U Sports, who relies on those 19 and 20-year-old kids who've put up 90 points but haven't earned an NHL contract. They rely on those kids to leave the CHL and join U Sports. So it's going to significantly change the junior hockey landscape. I expect that the CHL will get younger. I've already spoken with dozens of general managers and coaches from across all three leagues who are considering how they're going to begin to build their lineups differently. They're going to try to win with 17 and 18-year-olds, knowing that they can't risk waiting on 19 and 20-year-olds who may leave them. The teams in the the leagues in the OHL and the QMJHL, I think, will eventually move to align their draft ages with the WHL and turn it into more of a 15 to 18 thing rather than a 16 to 20 thing. But we're going to be sort of going through that as like on the fly here. I think even expansion isn't out of the question in the CHL. I think you could see USHL teams over the next year or two begin to approach the CHL. There have already, according to some reporting, and I'll have more on this in my story when it's out, but there have already been reports of USHL clubs going to the CHL. So this is huge. It's huge. It's great for the players. I think that's clear to everyone, especially for Canadian players. There are people in college hockey and in USA hockey and in the USHL who worry about American kids obviously losing out on college opportunities to Canadian kids now coming south via the CHL and taking roster spots in the NCAA. there could be more momentum for American kids to play in the CHL for a London or a Kitchener rather than going to the NTDP, for example. I think there will be some kids who make that choice away from the NTDP towards the CHL as well. So implications for the NTDP, it's huge. I mean, I could go on, and my story gets into all of the layers, but it's this is going to be one of these stories of the hockey world over the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, that largely kind of lines up with what I've been sort of led to believe over the last year, that this has kind of been percolating. I do think that it is going to be as seismic as you're saying. I think it's going to. I think it's very interesting that the CHL might trend younger. I think with regards to, the sort of level of college players who might not get the same opportunities anymore. I mean, the NCAA hockey at the Division I level has expanded a decent amount, I would say, in the last decade. There have been a few programs that have been added. And I think those programs and the programs sort of in the middle of the table are going to be, bolstering their lineups. And there might be more demand for more hockey players at more schools in the NCAA. And from there, you never know where Division I might go from here. I agree that Junior A in hockey, I mean, it already wasn't in the best place with how good the USHL has gotten and how much of a draw that can be for Canadians. That's going to be a tricky one to manage. I think like community level hockey that isn't on the major junior level is going to be an interesting story to follow, I think. And
especially after the BCHL has just made this move to break away from Hockey Canada,
which I think is partly related to something like this maybe being on the horizon, where it's like they need to get as much talent there as they can and like be as competitive as they can, because who knows who's going to be even in that league in 3 years. So, yeah.
If you're the future Owen Power or Michael Hage or Adam Valentini, or you go down the list, Macklin Celebrini, Adam Fantilli, there's going to be much more of a pull for those kids. Now, Youngstown and the Chicago Steel will continue to sell themselves and are legit programs who are going to continue to attract players. Youngstown attracted Adam Benash this year when Benash could have gone to the CHL if he wanted. So there are still sales pitches that these clubs can make, but the Canadian kids, I think, are going to be more inclined to stay at home and play in the leagues that they've grown up watching and be closer to family. And as a result, the CHL is going to get those premium talents, more of those premium talents earlier. And I think they're happy with that, even if the cost of it is maybe losing some 19 and 20-year-olds at the tail end.
Well, and I think that's a win too, in a way, right? Like, I think that's a win for hockey fans. And I think that I'll always kind of side with young players sort of being able to have a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more freedom with regards to where they play and what they do. Like, we're still dealing with kids, right? So all of this complication and like, well, if you want to go get a good education at a US school, you have to do this and this and this and this, and you can't do this and this and this and this. It's like now that's kind of shifting a little bit. And even with regards to NHL teams and these guys, like they can have a bit of a closer eye on these guys if they can go to rookie tournaments, even if they could, step into a lineup for a preseason game or something. I don't think there's payment involved in those, but then I'm not sure exactly how that works in the CBA.
All of that's going to have to be sorted.
That's going to have to be sorted out, right? Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting, and like you said, they're talking about August 2025 as sort of when these things start to shift, but then you said 2026.
2025, 2026 season, like next season, these players will be eligible.
And then the CBA is up.
CBA is September 2026. Yes.
So that's going to be an interesting year of time where there might be a little bit of, I don't know, anarchy, like what's allowed and what isn't. Like, I'm not exactly sure how that'll work out because the CBA does need to. I mean, I guess they could file like an amendment to the CBA for a year.
Even signing rights need to be sorted out. NCAA players don't become free agents for 4 seasons. CHL players become free agents after 2 seasons. That absolutely needs to be standardized. It's obviously 5 years in Europe. I expect that out of this, the next CBA will have a standard for all drafted prospects, post-draft free agency rights. All of that will need to be sorted. So we're still in the very, very early stages of all of this. The CHL has to figure out what to do with their scholarship money and whether they're going to allow players to use the scholarship money that they've been promised if they decide to go NCAA. There's some webs to untangle for everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, we've gotten some questions in the chat about potentially merging the CHL and the USHL. And I mean, I don't know about that, but I do think that there will be some movement of like organizations of moving around. I don't know if like I'm very curious about how teams like, you know, Val d'Or are going to be able to compete with programs that might be in other CHL locations. Like if they put a CHL team in Chicago, if the Chicago Steel comes to the OHL or something, that's a big market that will then have a junior hockey team that has been pretty successful in the USHL as is. I'm not sure what the capacity of their rink is, or if that's sort of a CHL standard rink in Chicago, but it's going to be weird. I mean, where do you sort of come down on this? I feel like it'll be more like the USHL kind of hemorrhages teams, and the CHL might be able to, you know, weasel their way into a bit of an expansion, like you said. But it's going to be interesting. I don't know. Where do you fall on that?
No question. On the QMJHL note, because you mentioned Val d'Or, one of the interesting ripples is that their region is the East Coast. Their US they all have designated regions, right? All three leagues have designated regions in terms of who they can pull through their agreements with USA Hockey and Hockey Canada, who they can pull. And the QMJHL maybe stands to benefit actually the most from this, because their region is Boston, it's Massachusetts, it's that Eastern Coast where there are so many college programs, and where now kids can sort of stay there and play, or even pull American kids up to participate in the QMJHL before going back to those colleges, kind of thing. So even the Q has lost players. Obviously, Sacha Boisvert was a top minor hockey prospect. So that layer of it, but in terms of you're right, the rich are going to get richer. The Londons and the Kitcheners and the Edmonton Oil Kings and the Quebec Ramparts and the Halifax Mooseheads, those are the teams that stand to win the most from this, because they've already done a good job of pulling those players. The St. John Sea Dogs have obviously done a really good job of pulling American players. The Moncton Wildcats have one of the richest Canadians in the country as their owner, and a state-of-the-art gorgeous facility. So you're right. The teams in the smaller markets could have a tougher time, especially if they become more big dogs. Like if now Youngstown isn't rife with money, but if a Youngstown or a Chicago, I don't think we're trending towards any kind of merger with the entirety of the USHL. I don't think there would be appetite from owners and the board of governors within any of the three leagues, frankly, for that. Everybody always talks about the idea of a 4-team Memorial Cup that features the USHL champion. Maybe, but even that, I'm not sure there's going to be a ton of appetite from the CHL for that. They like their format with a host team. So yeah, I mean, all of that still needs to be ironed out, and there are going to be discussions at the very least about all of it.
I thought as well, like what I've been talking to people about over the last year when this sort of started coming up, there also are some lawsuits out there in the US, or potential lawsuits about those geographic restrictions with US players. I'm not sure if there's been any momentum one way or the other on those, but is there a chance that those, like playing in Boston, right? If you're a Boston kid and being forced into the QMJHL, is that something that might also shift in the next year or two as well? Because I thought there was something about that flying around.
Yes, the class action lawsuit that's before the courts at the moment with the NCAA is about U.S. antitrust laws, which basically is arguing that the professional language designated to CHL players no longer applies, especially after the introduction of NIL money. I mean, CHL players get whatever it is, $470 a month, which is really just for Ubers and Subway, right? So that piece of it, I think, became immediately outdated once tens of thousands of dollars. Now, it's not the millions that they're giving out in college football, for example, but there are players who are now getting thousands of dollars to play college hockey through NIL sponsorships and all of that. So that language absolutely needed to change. I don't know whether in that case specifically, I can go through the files that I have on it. I don't know whether in that case specifically, whether it gets into the weeds of the actual boundaries of where these kids are allowed to play, but it does feel like a natural next step in terms of these kids should be able to play wherever they want. There shouldn't be restrictions on these kids. If they can play in Europe or play anywhere they want in the United States, why are they restricted on where they can play in Canada, right? So if a kid's willing to move from the East Coast to go play for the Vancouver Giants, then I think a kid should have the freedom to do that. Now, I also absolutely understand the desire of all three leagues to keep their player pools predominantly from the minor hockey systems that feed them. Like it's important, and it's important for the USHL too, to keep AAA hockey healthy in the United States. And I think it will be harmed by this decision as kids potentially come up to the GTHL and that kind of a thing in advance of the OHL draft as well. So I do understand why the OHL and the Q and the Dub would want to protect and maintain healthy development systems for themselves, which is in BC, obviously it's the prep schools, which I think is getting a little out of hand in terms of where all of these kids are playing before the WHL Bantam draft, and even some of the prep schools in Alberta. But AAA hockey in Manitoba still matters, and it's important for the future of the CHL and the future of the NHL and all of that, right? So it's not, I don't think it's going to become a free for all. I think there will still be roster limits. There will still be limits on 16-year-old cards. I've had several general managers say that they want the number of 16-year-old cards they're allotted bumped up naturally. But there are still going to be limits on imports and how many imports are eligible to play for teams. I still think that that's going to continue here.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, it's going to be very interesting, to say the least. I mean, it is probably the biggest shift in the hockey landscape, at least in Canada, even. Like, I don't remember the last time something like this has kind of really occurred. Like, the only thing I can really think of is when the NHL started allowing 18-year-old NCAA players to be drafted. Like, before you had to wait a year. So guys like Danny Heatley were a year older than everybody else when they were drafted. I believe like Thomas Vanek is another example of that. So, but like, and that's not, but I don't even think that's as big of a shift as this, right? Like, seeing the shifts in college hockey and the desire of more and more Canadians. I believe the number of Canadians playing U.S. college hockey has doubled, I want to say, in the last
nine. In talking with USA Hockey for my story, the number they gave me was that it's at 9% this season. So 9% of NCAA. I don't know whether that's higher or lower than in previous years, but it's going to be, you might see it get to 15, 20, 25% here.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be a very interesting thing. And how, like you mentioned, U Sports as well. Someone asked a question about why college hockey in Canada is not as popular as the NCAA in America. But I mean, I think it just comes down to resources. Like, the junior teams here just have more resources and attention and a higher level of competition. And this isn't going to help U Sports hockey, I don't think, right? Like, why would you go to Concordia when you could go to Harvard or, whatever?
Yeah, it's not just the resources of the CHL teams keeping those kids for longer. It's the reverse. It's the resources of college hockey programs that have tens of millions of dollars to work with. I go into these facilities. They're unbelievable. I've spoken with college players who are alums of Wisconsin, which I've been to, who are alums of Michigan State and their new facilities that they just renovated at Michigan State. And you have kids coming out of these programs that say, this is the best facility that I will ever have in my career. These facilities are better than facilities at NHL rinks, at NHL practice facilities. Certainly, they're a huge step above what anything offered by an AHL franchise. It is the state of the art. Everything is brand new. And yeah, the Canadian universities don't have that kind of money coming in from tuition. They don't have that kind of history of athletics and in terms of ticket sales, all of it, right? So U Sports will never, from a financial standpoint, be able to compete.
Yeah. So I guess, like, fast forwarding 7 years, let's say 7 to 10 years from now, you can be as optimistic or idealistic or whatever you want as possible. But what do you think, in Canada at least, our sort of hockey landscape looks like for, let's say, a 16-year-old through their age 20 season? Like, after all of this happens and the dust kind of settles, what do you think is going to be the overall look in the maybe NHL pipeline or college pipeline? Like, I don't really have a good answer. And if you don't, that makes sense too. But I'm curious of what you think.
Well, I've spoken to people on both sides who think if we can build the proper structure for this, that this could be the best case for everybody, and that the new development path, the new standard development path, could literally become playing in the CHL from 15 or 16 until 18 or 19, playing a couple of years in the NCAA, and then turning pro from there. I think that is potentially the path for a lot of kids. If I look across the CHL right now, could Beckett Seneke have benefited from playing college hockey this year? Could TJ Ginla have benefited from playing college hockey this year, right? So those are the kinds of players that are going to begin to consider this path. Obviously, there was talk last year of Matt Savoy getting an exception like Shane Wright did to be able to play in the AHL at 19. Maybe those guys don't have to play in the AHL at 19, or maybe their fan bases don't have to clamor for them to, at least. Because the NCAA is that natural next step for some of those players to play against bigger, stronger competition, impact building still. I think that's what we're looking at here, hopefully. And if it all works out, I think it could be really positive by and large for the NHL. It gives the NHL more time to make decisions on some of these kids. For years now, NHL teams have been gun shy about taking CHL players in rounds 4 to 7 in the draft, knowing that they only have 2 years to make a decision on them, and that they'd rather take a lesser player from Sweden or the NCAA if it buys them more time, right? So that piece of the puzzle in and of itself, if all of that is aligned and squared away, it becomes a really big positive, I think, for hockey at large, frankly.
Yeah, I think it is. I agree. I think in general, it's going to be a lot more positive, right? I feel like the way it's been now is a little archaic and restrictive and overcomplicated. And now I think as well, like I'm really interested after talking to you. I'm really interested in the age difference now that the CHL might undergo, where I think that part of the draw of the CHL for hockey fans in general is that NHL draft aspect. Like, this is the future of hockey from Canada, and the intrigue of bringing over these imports and the, it's an interesting sort of feeder for the NHL. And if they're going to naturally sort of lean more into that, it almost makes it more marketable, right? Like, the kids who are 19, 20 years old, they're going to go off to college hockey and they're going to have their own experience there. And it's going to be great, college facilities and college crowds. And, I've been to college hockey games and it's amazing. It's a great experience. And so it's a very interesting thing, I think, that's going to shift of where people are, of why people are drawn to the CHL to watch it or to follow it, and if there is a lot more of that, feeder for, college programs are going to pick and choose from these guys as well, but also like the NHL draft, it's going to be very interesting from even just a quality of competition standpoint of seeing how things adjust from there as that league trends a little younger, maybe a little bit less physically mature, because I think that's a big thing that helps prep young guys for pro hockey in the CHL is that they're playing 20-year-olds a lot of the time. And in the NCAA, you have guys who might be 17, 18 years old going off and playing against 24-year-olds a lot more often, right? Guys like, I'm trying to think of examples of CHL players in the past that at 18, like Beckett Seneke, you said, who what if he was playing college hockey this year instead? Like, that would be a very interesting sort of physical test for him as well, relative to where the CHL is. So that's where I'm very curious from. I mean, it's kind of selfish as well, because the more people that are interested in the draft, the more people will pay attention to people like you and I. But I think that's going to be the interesting thing, is seeing how the marketability and the tone of the CHL might shift a little bit.
It also forces everybody to up their game from an organization standpoint. The CHL is still going to want to keep 19 and 20-year-old kids, but now those kids don't have to make that decision at 15 or 16 years old with their families and their advisors. Previously, they had to lock in that decision when they were children, right? So now you can wait until you're 18 or 19 to make the college decision for yourself. And as a result, I think everyone in the CHL knows now, okay, we've got to step up our game. We need to make sure that by the time they get to 18 or 19 or 20 and they can leave, that they still don't want to, that they want to stick around, that we can hang on to those talents. The flip side of that is, and this is a worry of several GMs around the leagues that I've spoken to, the flip side is that the CHL is already dominated by parents and agents. And I think giving them more flexibility opens up a Pandora's box of, if I'm not on the power play, or if I'm not being played and deployed like I want to, then I'm going to leave and go to the USHL. And there's even coaches who think that some of these players and agents and their families are so not toxic, but they're so needy that you might even see kids going back and forth multiple times. Like you might see a kid who's unhappy in the CHL leave for the USHL, and then a kid who's unhappy in the USHL come back and play in the CHL again for a different team. And so that piece of it is the natural negative of this. Is are the Londons of the world just going to continue to sort of hoard talent, and what does that mean for the ability to retain players for, as you mentioned, a Valdor or a Sault Ste. Marie or a Flint? It becomes more power is good for the players, but it also gives more power to their parents and to agents and all of that too, right?
Right. As you were talking, the NCAA put out a statement that didn't go into the specifics, but they said they introduced a proposal for pre-enrollment activities for ice hockey and skiing. The introduction of the legislation is not final until the meeting concludes on Wednesday. Today is Thursday, so maybe that means next week. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but
I'm seeing this afternoon on their tweet. I think they've
they might have had a typo in here.
All right. Well, I may have to hop off here. Let me send a note to my editor.
Yeah.
But I can hop back on and we can get back into some of the NHL draft guys we want.
Yeah. If you got to hop off, we can hop off and we can go through some stuff while you're away. But just let me know. No problem. But yeah, I mean, it looks like the council voted to allow CHL players to be eligible beginning next season. So that's quicker than I was told it was going to be. I thought this was going to be a longer process, but I guess, and when I spoke to some NHL coaches over the last year, I got some pretty heated replies from some of them about this whole topic being not an option for them. But I guess that has changed whether they like it or not. So yeah. We'll see.
I do have to hop off here to finish up our two stories, but I shouldn't be long because they're already written. And then I'll hop back on with you.
Do what you got to do. Come back whenever, man. All right.
Cool.
Thanks for hopping on.
Yeah. Cheers, man.
Yep. Cool. Well, thank you to Scott for that. There was some really interesting stuff in there that I didn't. I mean, I don't have the same insider abilities that Scott does, but I have been talking to people about this and hearing about this from people for a year, and the thoughts on this from the NCAA themselves have shifted significantly. I would say there was some pretty. I got maybe some of the most combative emails I've ever gotten when I was talking to some people about this a year ago, which is kind of fun.
That's awesome.
So now it looks like things are, whether they like it or not, going in a certain direction. So it's going to be seismic, honestly. And I think Scott is right that this overall is a really big positive for hockey, especially in Canada. And hockey in Canada has needed a bit of a shakeup so bad for so long, I think. And this is a big thing in what will be, I think, the right direction. I mean, I'm a big free market capitalist type person. So in my opinion, I think that hockey in Canada, if we're going to be a hockey nation, we got to be a premier source of talent and a premier quality organization. If we're going to be bringing in the next generation of hockey, of great hockey players. I mean, we always are successful at doing that generally, but this is going to push the quality higher. It's going to push in a lot of ways the quality of both college hockey and the CHL higher. Younger players are going to play more minutes. They're going to get more reps. Older players in the CHL are going to be able to test themselves even more. I think that the USHL is going to undergo some shifts, some changes. I do agree with Scott as well, talking about a potential merger. It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. You know, like if you expand the WHL and include a team like the Omaha Lancers, that's a heck of a commute to go all the way to Nebraska if you are, Prince Albert. I mean, they already have big enough travel expenses that I just don't think that that's a logical thing to do. But AJ, I don't know if you have any thoughts after that discussion from Scott.
No, it was really fascinating. I just really sat back and tried to listen because it's more interesting than I had ever thought it was. Just all the avenues it opens up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's exciting.
And I mean, what I was told a few times was that the initial idea was that only the oldest players in the CHL were going to be eligible. that this wasn't going to be sort of a free-for-all for, you know, more 16, 17-year-olds to play in the OHL, and then they would go off when they're 18, 19 years old to college. But it seems like that's also shifted as well to be much less restrictive and just going, you know what? If you are a hockey player in Canada at the highest levels of junior hockey, you can go to college. We don't care. We'll figure it out. And, you know, we'll see how CHL teams adapt to this. But if I'm a CHL general manager, which I'm not, I don't really mind. I just kind of go, you know what? If my guys want to leave and go to college, my job is to make my team marketable with other players. My job is to make sure that just because I lose a Beckett Seneca, for example, I can still have a team where people want to show up to the rink for some reason. And that's why, like, with the types of players that I like and the types of players that you like, I feel like junior hockey fans would respond quite well to guys like that, where it's like you just kind of dig for players like that. You have good facilities to sort of try to line up with what Scott was talking about with NCAA, but that's really tough because the NCAA, we know the American education system at the university level. If there's anything there, it's money. And that's not quite the same thing you can say about junior hockey in Canada, but it's not, you know, they're not that far, they're not that bad. You know, you look at the London Knights, they play in the closest thing to an NHL arena that in junior hockey that there is, right? Like I've been there and it's a zoo in there.
Right.
I think that's part of the draw of the London Knights, to be perfectly honest. It's like you want to play junior hockey in the place that's closest in a rink that's closest to an NHL rink, and with that many eyeballs on you, you can go to London, and not many other places are like that.
I just want to quickly mention that
go nuts. Yeah,
there is a chance Scott comes back and we get to talk about the draft rankings. I think this story kind of took off, and Will and I weren't really anticipating doing this, even as early as 30 minutes before the show. But I think it went in a direction that I think is really awesome and been really exciting. So there's a good chance Scott comes back and we get to talk with him more about his draft rankings, and he gives us a little more of an update on what's going on here. Also, I have been putting the leave a like in the chat kind of thing, just because it really does help the stream, and it's been quite the ride here, and getting Scott on is always a pleasure, and being able to pump out this content that we're trying to pump out in the next week, because we have a plan to do content every weekday, like a video or live stream throughout the entire weekday of the week. So if you can leave a like, it'll really help us out that way. So I'll do that's my part of what I'm gonna say. Also, game tape coming out tomorrow at 12. Get to see our interview, or Tony's interview with Landon DuPont, the piece I edited. Really proud of it, really excited. So I wanted to mention that as well. But I think this has been a pretty great stream, and Will, I'll let you go on to talking, so I don't have to fill this with ads.
Well, I was gonna say as well. You said you put Scott's rankings in the description as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you have an Athletic subscription, you can go check those out as well while he's away. I will also say that with regards to the channel, on tomorrow we were planning on doing a YouTube premiere.
Yeah, we're gonna try and do that.
We're gonna try to do that at noon. I mean, I should be available to do that at noon. So that shouldn't be the end of the world.
I'll definitely be available.
Yeah, gotcha. So also I just remembered I forgot about a meeting I had today. So we'll figure that one out too. But no, anyway, or no, that was tomorrow. I don't know what the hell is happening. But anyway.
A lot.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. So we'll try to get that YouTube premiere done, and we can all hang out and do some stuff during the tape release. We'll try to get Tony in there, but no guarantees because he has a big boy job. But anyway,
I don't think he'll be able to show up.
Probably not.
He's also moving into a house.
That's true. He is moving house, as he mentioned on Monday night. So I guess in the meantime, while Scott is away, we can maybe tackle some questions that maybe don't pertain exactly straight up to him, or at least things that he wouldn't be able to, or he would be able to shine a lot more of a light on.
You're gonna have to answer all the David Phillip and J Mulk questions, is what that means.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. No, I happily answer those questions. Of course. Okay. So much too soon. Oh, sorry. Thoughts on the new PWHL logos? I will say, the PWHL merch shop is worth looking at. The PWHL merchandise this so far looks pretty good. That's not what the PWHL website looks like. No, stop it. I need to find the link. But the thing I love, I might actually pick some up, is like the vintage t-shirts and sweaters in here. I think they're really, really cool. I know that there were some leaks of some merch from months ago that got kind of flamed on the internet. I will say I'm not a fan of dots on jerseys. They put dots on the numbers in jerseys and stuff like what Vegas has on theirs, which I just can't stand. I think those are nasty. But the jerseys look cool. I think the Boston Fleet jersey is cool. I think Minnesota has a really cool vintage sweater type vibe going on. The Montreal logo and jersey looks so cool. I think that's just so neat. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a really, really good step in the right direction for them. I'm really excited to watch the PWHL this year. It was fun last year, but now there seems to be a lot more of a fundamental ground to build on, and it's going to be really, really exciting. And yeah, so I'm excited. It's going to be a good time. And I'll be definitely paying attention when they get moving.
Having logos on jerseys, like permanent logos, make everything feel better, because
correct,
it doesn't feel like a one-off. Even though we knew it wasn't, there's something a little more special about it now.
Yeah. And I also I just know for a fact that wherever Caroline Harvey goes, I'll follow her. Caroline Harvey, honestly, like, might be one of my favorite hockey players on the planet just by watching her play. I don't know when she'll go to the PWHL, but she'll go. She'll be drafted very, very, very high, and she'll be a ton of fun to watch. I can't wait, because I love how she plays.
So the Tony Ferrari treatment with Lamar Jackson and becoming a Ravens fan, yes?
Fully, 100%. I will follow Caroline Harvey into war if she were a general. I don't care. She's just so much fun to watch. One of the best women's hockey players, I think, that's out there. Just still playing college hockey and doing really over 2 points a game this year. I think not bad.
That's pretty impressive. So do you want to kind of get into what you were going to tackle with Scott? So like with the draft rankings, just so when he does come back, we kind of preview something. And if not, that way we touch on this.
So it's going to be basically, we're just taking a look at either lists, some general impressions of the season or the class this season so far. I haven't put out a public list yet, but I did send him names where we are quite a bit off. I won't obviously share those until he gets back. We've spoken about a few that we want to focus on for sure. So it's going to be relatively straightforward in that sense. But there's going to be, so if you haven't seen what his rankings look like, obviously they're paywalled, so I'm not just going to spoil it for you, but you'll be able to put 2 and 2 together based on who we talk about. I don't know I think that's pretty much all we were going to really talk about, is just sort of comparing and contrasting on that sense.
Well, just some of the players that you're higher on, or he's higher on than you. Maybe you can give a little bit of a preview of that. And then worst case scenario, we invite him back on sometime soon to talk about it if he can't rejoin us here today.
Like specific players that might pop up?
Some of the players you were going to talk about. Just as a little bit of a preview to the audience as what we could be getting if Scott can grace us with his presence again.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he'll be back at some point, but he's got bigger things to do, which is fine. We knew that going in. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, we were going to talk a lot about, I think Anton Frendel's going to be a very interesting one that we talk about. He's a guy who I think he has at 5 currently, and I don't. So we will talk about him because he's been a fascinating one this season, to say the least. Got other guys on here that I think people in here might really like. Victor Eklund, there's a bit of a difference there. LJ Mooney, there's a pretty big difference there, but that's just because I love him irrationally. Like, I'm very well aware that how much I love LJ Mooney is probably a little bit of overkill, but I've been doing this long enough to say where I just don't care. Like, I don't know. I just don't care that much.
Will cannot quantify his love for Little John Mooney.
Little John, man. Yeah.
That's what LJ stands for, everybody. Little John.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to spoil my argument for him, but that kid is a rambunctious, annoying, skilled, wicked, fast jerk of a hockey player that I would hate to play against. Like, just, he is all over the place all the time, and I love guys like that. It's just a ton of fun to watch that guy play. Oh, look who's back.
Here we are.
Yeah, here we are. We're all set, eh? Any last minute surprises you needed to throw in there before coming back, or just hitting send?
No, one sentence and a hyperlink, and we were good to go. The newser is out, and the big feature will be coming shortly.
Yeah. So is that coming today, or?
Yeah, the feature that I've been working on with the like 30 to 40 people that I spoke to, that's coming today. The newser just has quotes from 3 or 4 people kind of thing, but there's a full-fledged piece that'll be dropping in the next hour or so whenever our very nice people on the SEO team decide that it's
ready to go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome back. Thanks for coming. So we kind of talked a little bit about what we were going to talk about as well, aside from the NCAA thing, which is kind of looking at our early view of the NHL draft class for this season and sort of comparing and contrasting. We came up with some names that I think we both thought would be an interesting discussion point. Just for the record, your rankings are in our description box, and I'll make sure that on the podcast they'll be down there as well. So, I mean, the first name, and I think this is the one that I think is probably one that a lot of people are really interested in, and that's Anton Frundell. And I know, so on your list, you've got him still in your top 5. I don't. The only thing I'll say before I let you go is, with me, I mean, I tend to look at players as, what they are now, and then sort of evaluating as the year goes on, because I know what I've seen of Frundell last year. I know what I felt about him coming out of last year, and just sort of, based on his start this season, I go, okay, this player as he is, I'm comfortable taking him around here, and I'll think about it more and look at other guys and bump him up if need be. But you've got Frundell a little bit higher than I do at 5. So what's your read on him? Because with him, it's been a tricky season for him, I think, to this point. But where do you come down on him?
Well, he's underwhelmed. He hasn't looked himself. He hasn't looked like the version of himself that we saw pretty much all of last year. He had some really high highs last year. The first big one being at the Fall 5 Nations in Plymouth, where he was clearly, as an underager, the best player on that Swedish team, and frankly dominant in that tournament. And from there, he just started. There started to be a lot of excitement over. Okay, here's a strong, stocky built, 6'1" center who can play with, even though he's stocky, can play with some pace, can play with some tempo, makes a lot of plays, checks sort of a ton of boxes from a skill perspective, seemed to be detail oriented. This year, I think part of what's undone him is obviously a ton of lost time, virtually an entire off season, and about 2/3 of last season, half to 2/3 of last season, two separate unrelated injuries. And then you go back to that stocky kid that we saw last year, and now suddenly you transport that kid to this year. And frankly, I have felt, and I know others in the scouting community have felt, like he's looked out of shape. Like the fitness level just isn't there. Like he's not playing with that same jump, and he's not playing with that same pace. And I think part of that will sort itself out over the course of the year. These kids lose weight as they play games, and all of that is true. But he looks like he's a little heavy out there, and just doesn't look like he has that same sort of confidence and attack mentality that we saw a year ago, not just internationally with the Swedish U18 team, but also, frankly, even at the J20 level and some of the pro games that he got. So I'm still in a wait and see. Coming into this season, I felt like he was a 2, 3, 4 guy. Then I kind of moved him down to 5 after his start this year. It kind of reminds me of Emil Hemming. I talked to a lot of people about Emil Hemming, not as a player, but I talked to a lot of people about Emil Hemming last year. And Emil Hemming looked out of shape at the start of that season. And apparently that was just sort of how he is. It's not that it wasn't with Emil Hemming that he was a bad eater or that he didn't work out or that kind of thing. It's just that when he's not playing, he's just biologically, genetically, he tends to put on weight, and then he loses a ton of it over the course of the season. And everything I've been told is that it's kind of the same story with Frundell. And that he'll get back in, the fitness levels will get back to where they need to be. And it's not a work ethic issue or that kind of thing. It's not a laziness thing. But the question now is, previously he was viewed as a top 6 center for this upcoming World Juniors. And now I start to wonder about what kind of role he might play on that team. We're putting together our mocks already at The Athletic for sort of our predicted rosters, and he's going to be on that team. I'm pretty confident in that. But he was going to be, I think, a premium guy behind David Edstrom, was kind of going to be the second line center on that team. And now I'm not so sure that he deserves that kind of a role over a Pettersson or an Eriksson or some of the other guys that they have at their disposal, right? So that piece of it, and obviously Force-Fial and some of their darlings as well that they love. But he just, like, he needs to be better. He just needs to play with more speed. That's been my one thing with him. It seems like his game has slowed down, and he's not dominating. He's not impacting play at least as consistently as he was, even at the junior level. And now a couple of the games I've watched at the junior level, he's had some real good looks that didn't go in. So I think that the production will come around. But he should be a force at that level, and he just doesn't quite look that way at the moment.
Yeah, it is interesting the way you talk about him, and that's largely been my impression of him as well, and my understanding of what's going on there, just talking to the people I know. And the thing with Frondell is, I mean, I remember what happened with Matthew Nyes during the pandemic. I remember him being that first round, maybe not heralded as like a top 5 guy that people thought when he was 16, 17 years old, but I remember his draft year with Tri-City, I believe,
Tri-City
was kind of iffy, and it turned out he had, I believe, mono for quite a while, and just was never really got up to that level that kind of people saw when he was 16, 17. And obviously those people made a mistake by going, well, maybe we'll look at someone else, and he fell all the way to Toronto, and Toronto doesn't mind having him lying around. And I remember that Super Series that summer, like after he was drafted, he looked like a totally different player. Like after he had some reps and some time, I remember that tournament going, oh boy, like this guy, there's something here that I missed at least. And so I don't know if that's going to be the case with Frondell, because I have watched him at the junior level and I do see him get those looks. But for a guy who played at the pro level a little bit last year, and for a guy who has a line mate or a teammate in Victor Eklund, who we can talk about in a sec, who's doing a very good job doing what it is that he does in the pro league, like they're on the same team. And Frondell, when I watched him in Hockey Allsvenskan this year, did not look ready for that level really at all. And so if there is that injury concern or whatever, because he just hasn't played all that much in the last little while, that's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. So like, I'm curious of where you value these kinds of things, because I think it is a legitimate concern, but you don't want to overcorrect, right? If you like, I guess it's a thing where you have to do your homework though, right?
Certainly he's a player where each new viewing will take on more importance than the last. Right. I'm often a guy who treats sort of the September, October viewing as not equal to the April, May one, but I still hang on to those viewings. I think it's important for the body of work not to get carried away from one viewing to the next in either direction. But with him, I think you can comfortably say, okay, we might need, at the end of the year, we might need to just look back on the January to March version of Anton Frondell and maybe leave the rest of it in the dustbin, if you will. That doesn't mean you don't ask him about his fitness level at the combine or whatever, and what he does in the off season and what he eats and all of that. But I do think there needs to be a little bit of leeway here with him to give him some time to figure it out. And ultimately, we all do these lists I do mine every 2.5 months, basically over the course of the season. I do 4 or 5 of them. And ultimately, none of them matter except the last one, right? So we just need to get to everybody needs to get to a comfortable spot, or maybe an uncomfortable one if he doesn't turn it around with him and him specifically. And you do start to wonder though, if this lasts, like if he's just okay this year and is just okay at the World Juniors, or ends up as the 13th forward at the World Juniors, or that kind of a thing. And it just kind of lingers for him. I immediately start to wonder about Aturatu and some of the guys that we've seen just sort of free fall in their draft year when they struggle at the pro level, or they don't dominate at the junior level like we expected them to. Sometimes it's hard to live up to expectations for some of these guys, especially when a player like Frondell has played so well internationally and has stood out amongst his peers that way. So I think he'll be him, and I don't know if you want to get into Ryabkin, but him and like Ryabkin's got to figure it out here. Like there's no whether he can get over to the USHL or not. If he's stuck there, he's got to play better and be better and be a better teammate by the sounds of it as well. So there's those two guys at the top are like people are gonna make fast and hard determinations about them eventually. So they better get going here.
Yeah, Ryabkin was one that I was a little surprised to see you have him still very high, because honestly, when I've seen him this year, I've seen a bunch of them because I just can't really believe what I'm seeing. It just does not look like the same player as last year. And from what I've been told from people, it's not a good situation really for him. Like to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if NHL teams kind of went, yeah, we might just go with someone else. Like it's kind of an all around not great situation, right? Like the on ice play just has never really been there this season from what I've seen. Like maybe in the KHL preseason, there was a bit that I saw where I'm like, all right, like I could see how whatever, but then he couldn't stick it on the roster there. They sent him down. I don't think he liked that very much and didn't really seem to be playing the same way in the junior league that I remember him last year.
Not at all.
You know, I watched him at the second division a bit now that he's there in St. Petersburg, and it's still just not like, if we're talking top 10 guy, I just do not see it. And I don't know what that's all about, but what's your, I mean, I guess right now it's still very early, so maybe putting him at 7 is preliminary, but what's the reasoning behind Ryabkin there? Because what I've seen this year, I just kind of go, I just have other guys where I've seen more, I believe in them more, and I just don't know.
Yeah, part of it is just not being super excited about what is in that 8 to 15 range. When I look back at last year's draft, I finished with a top 17, and all of those top 17 guys would rank very highly on my list at the moment. For if we were combining the two of them, it was just a much deeper draft. Like I like Spence, I like Desnoyers, I like Eklund a lot. I like Cole Reshny a lot. Mm-hmm. But they don't turn my crank in the same way that even a Consta Hellenius did last year, or some of those sort of teens guys, some of those 5th and 6th ranked defensemen on my board, Anton Salayev, Sam Dickinson. Like they're just, I don't think a Spence is having that kind of upside in terms of an NHL projection kind of thing long term. So part of it is that I just think he's more talented than those players from a skill perspective. And I do still remember how filthy he looked at times, frankly, last year. But in saying that, he's been horrible this year. The decision-making on the puck, the decision-making off the puck has been, frankly, pathetic in some of my viewings. I know even entering this year, and there was talk about this with Matvey as well, but with Ryabkin, there was actually like a little bit of smoke, more than I thought there was with Matvey, about just kind of being a shitty kid. And not that he'd done anything illegal or done anything bad or anything to report on, but just not a great teammate kind of thing was something that I'd heard from multiple people. And I don't even know that many people in Russia. So that piece of it was sort of the first alarm bell. And then the way that this season has gone so far, for like, he's been horrible. So I don't know. We'll see. The skill level is legit though. Andy's a center, and he'd even shown some competitiveness last year and a little bit of roundedness to his game last year that just seems to have vanished. So he's absolutely, as other guys impress me. Like if a Smith really sort of continues to put it all together, and Eklund continues to produce at the clip that he's produced at in Hockey Allsvenskan, and Eklund has a positive World Juniors, he's also absolutely, obviously, a lock to be on that team, and it played very well for them at the World Junior Summer Showcase this summer in August. But if those guys sort of continue to look like they've looked, he'll end up outside the top 10 for me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I do think this class as a whole, I mean, you can feel free to disagree, obviously, but this class as a whole is not really turning my head as much as the past couple, I would say. Like, this kind of reminds me a little more of 2021, but I do think the top end, I mean, you and I largely agree on those names that are at that top end. I mean, I have Roger McQueen quite a bit lower, but I can understand why people would have him there. But largely, I mean, especially those top 4 names, both of us, they're interchangeable for us, right? Hagens, Martone, Schaefer, Misa. To me, those 4 are really special players. Like, those guys are legit. And, whereas in 2021, I felt like there was a bunch of guys where I'm going, yeah, I could see this guy being the best guy and I could see this guy being the best guy, but no one's like no one's blowing my mind, right? Like I had Matt Beniers first overall because I thought he was a very interesting sort of middle of the ice pivot that could glue a line together, and I value those guys, but none of those players were really blowing your mind. But this year, I think there's a few that do. And someone asked in the chat early on, like, where's the drop off this year? And I think it happens relatively quickly because there's not that many guys that are really like turning my head as potential serious impact players. But I don't know where you fall on that kind of thing as well.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just sort of getting out my feature here on Twitter, so I'm a little distracted. But no, I fall in the exact same spot. Those four have me really excited. I thought entering the year that Frundell and McQueen and Ryabkin had a chance to kind of be in that group. They now, at this current point in time, don't look like they are. McQueen obviously had a great start to the year and was doing that injured. This isn't an injury that just happened and then he was out. He was playing injured when he scored the 8 goals in 8 games, and he was playing injured at U18 Worlds last year. And obviously his tournament at U18 Worlds ended early. And I thought through the first game and a half at U18 Worlds that he was better than Martone and McKenna, arguably. Like he was very, very good there. It was only a game and a half, but he was very good in them and good in the pre-tournament there. So it did start to feel like McQueen had some momentum. He was looking way more coordinated. The athletic pieces of the puzzle seemed to be fitting together better than they were a year or 2 years ago, obviously. Sometimes it just takes time for those guys to figure out their feet and their legs. But there's not a lot after that. Like there's not a lot that really gets me excited, especially on defense a year after we had 6 kids who were legit. And I know everybody landed differently on those 6 kids last year, but part of the reason that everybody landed differently on those 6 kids last year was because they all had a lot of compelling attributes and for different reasons. And this group, especially on D after Schaefer, like Logan Hensler is a mixed bag, and we're still trying to figure out what Smith is, and he's certainly had some excellent games this year, and but those kids sort of need a bigger sample size before anybody gets excited about him. And then on top of that, this is such a brutal NTDP age group that it's hard to get excited about any of those kids, and that is extremely rare, and especially extremely rare when we're so close still to the Gabe Perreault, Will Smith, James Haggins, Cole Iserman, Ryan Leonard all playing on the same team at the same time, right? So with Hudson and you go down the list, right? So that piece of it feels like it was a long time ago for the NTDP, not just for the U18s, but also in beginning to watch these U17s. Maybe it's too off age groups, but that impacts the draft. We're going to have potentially James Haggins is the only American taken in the top 10 of this draft. And there's been recent drafts where we've had 3, 4, 5 American kids, right? So that in and of itself hurts the draft class, I think.
Why do you think that might be? Do you think it's just like a convergence of just random probability that we're here? Or is because this does seem to happen once in a while, but I don't remember, like I've been doing deep draft work for like 6 years. And I don't really remember at this early point in the season I've seen pretty much everybody. I mean, I've got 140 guys where I've got data, and there aren't, I think I drew a line in my spreadsheet of like my excitement line. Like this above this line is where I'm very excited to go back and watch these guys again. And that list ends at like 12 for me. Like, why do you think that like the NTDP, like you said, this year and next year, both look a little soft? And I don't think it's because a lot of them are going to the USHL where they are all, I don't think it's because they're going to the USHL, because I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on why this all might be happening.
And the U17s pulled one of the top prospects out of the WHL this year in Bucher, right? So it's not like they haven't attracted the talent. The top talent. I shouldn't be. Testing. No?
I hear him. Do you? Oh, I hear him.
Yep, got you.
Oh, I see him. I don't know what you're doing. Like I see him on the YouTube stream right now.
No, but I mean in my Video Ninja feed. I couldn't see him.
Weird. Okay.
So we'll see if this helps.
Well, yeah. Okay. We'll see.
How are we?
Great.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Cool. We're back. Anyway, sorry about that.
Yeah, I don't think it's a lack of recruitment. I don't think it's losing guys to the USHL. I mean, Ben Keevan's a good player, but he didn't make that team out of their 40-man camp, and it's not like there's a Trevor Connolly in this age group who's one of their more high-skill players in the age group and isn't participating at the program. That player, to me, in this age group in the USHL, and frankly, I think it's a weak USHL age group as well. There just isn't that guy. So I think it's just the cyclical nature of this. And part of it's the 206. Well, not just 206. It's obviously you've got Hagens and Hensler who are top end guys in this draft class, but Shane Van Sage, Dakota Room Mullen, there are multiple players eligible, American players eligible for this draft. Now Van Sage and Dakota are going to be second round picks, right? But third round picks. But there are several 06s who have already moved on to college hockey as well.
Yeah. We did talk a little bit about, obviously, Anton Ferndell early when we started talking about the draft. I mean, you've got Victor Eklund at 11. I have him higher than that. Those two guys play on the same team. I set my bar pretty high for Eklund going into this season because I knew how he played. I knew what he brought to the table. And to me, he's kind of outshined everything I kind of expected out of him. And I know there's a lot of people who watch my show and know how much I talk about him and know how much I'm a big fan. And I know that people in Djurgården are really excited about him and the strides he's taken in his game. But what are you seeing out of Victor Eklund? And, you know, obviously Frondell's a little higher on your board, but Eklund being a top 10 guy-ish makes a ton of sense to me. So where do you come down on him?
Yeah, Eklund has excited me this season. I had a mailbag at The Athletic this week, and unsurprisingly, one of the questions that I decided to answer was Victor versus William. Where do you stand? Who's the better prospect? And I think there's a natural comparison there just because they're both late birthdays. They're both 5'11". They both are going to be long-term wingers. Obviously, William played more center than Victor has sort of in the early stages of his career, but is now a winger with San Jose. Both played for Djurgården. Obviously, one was in the SHL at the time, and they've been relegated now. But the difference for me is that, and I felt that 7 was too high at the time for William. I felt that William was more of where I have Victor, which is sort of 10, 11. And the difference for me between the two is that I think Victor has a little, just it's cliche, but he's got a little bit more like zip to his game. Like William was all about intuition and timing and being in the right spots and supporting his line mates. And that was and the sort of smarts piece of it. And I actually think Victor has a lot of that in his game as well, in terms of just intuition inside the offensive zone, routes, all of that. But there's just a little bit more like, I don't even, it's almost kind of indescribable, a little bit more pace, a little bit more finishing touch, a little bit more flair, a little bit more just kind of zip to his game that gets you sort of, gets you excited. So that piece of it for Victor, I think is appealing. Like he can go out there and make a play. And that's not just like, I don't think he's that sort of dynamic skill guy, but there is more skill there than I think there was with William. And if they actually went the reverse, like if Victor were to play himself into the 7-8 range and William had gone 10 or 11, that may end up being appropriate for me. Right. I think there's still it's probably more likely that William ends up the higher drafted of the two. I think teams always, push comes to shove, they have a tough time drafting 5'10", 5'11" wingers in the top 10. But I'm not convinced that Victor is a worse prospect than his older brother at the same time and in the same stages in their development. And that's exciting because William's obviously become a good contributing player in the NHL. And I think Victor might have just a little bit more offense than William.
Honestly, I agree. I think that I'd argue that there are things about Victor's game that I think project better to the NHL than William does. Like, I think William took a little bit of time. He's kind of there, I would say. Like, he's kind of getting there. He's playing a big role in San Jose now, but it took some time to get to this point. And I feel like Victor does have a bit more of that zip and that intensity and that more northbound style of play that I think will work a little bit better, which is why I kind of value him as highly as I do. Like, I don't personally care much that he's a winger, but you win with guys like him, I think, long term. I do want to mention, bringing it back to the NCAA a little bit, there are 2 07s this year playing. You mentioned Cullen Potter, or didn't mention Cullen Potter as one of those those guys, NTDP guys that are now playing in the NCAA as maybe not someone to be excited about. I personally see a lot of potential in his game, and I understand why you have him quite a bit lower than I do. But I am curious because we've been talking about the U.S. a little bit, the U.S. crop of players for this year and next. Tell me a little bit about where you are in Colin Potter. I feel like I know what you'll say, but I'm curious of what you have on him so far and why you might be lower than me.
Well, the first thing that you always must start with Colin Potter is that he can scoot.
Yes.
And that piece of the puzzle is immediately exciting. He is I've been doing this for 12 years now, 8 at the Athletic, 4 prior to the Athletic. This is my 12th draft class doing this on a full-time basis. He is, and I am including, obviously Connor McDavid is one of one, but I am including Oliver Moore. You go down the list.
Yeah.
All of the best, like he's one of the best skaters at this age that I've ever seen. It is a ton of fun to watch him, not just on his edges and the way that he can make guys miss on cuts and sort of laterally, but when he curls and gets those feet moving and winds up and gets ahead of steam, defensemen just can't turn fast enough and they can't keep up with him. So that piece of it is exciting. On top of that, you've got a player with tons of puck skills. So with the puck on his stick, he can make plays. He really is, ironically, what the NTDP is missing this year. We very, very rarely see kids leave the NTDP after their U17 year and not do a U18 year. All sorts of talk about why that happened. All sorts of talk among scouts pre-draft this year that he had made a mistake. Lots of people believing that he wasn't ready to play at Arizona State, that Arizona State was in a bit of a tricky situation in terms of their roster and that it was going to be a struggle for him. Then he gets off to a really good start in his few games. The points haven't been there the last few games, but I think it's still been largely positive for him so far this season on that team, considering the situation and all of it. The worry is sort of naturally, does he know how to use it? And I think that's been my question really over the course of the last year and a half. There are games where he's electric, and there are games where he's doing a lot of the things that you don't want to see kids his age doing, the bad habits that you want to see out of his game, skating into traffic, skating into trouble, skating into the corner, ending up behind the net with no play, getting ahead of his teammates. All of that has been not just this year, which I think he's made some progress this year, but definitely last year at the program, it was a big issue for him in stretches. But you come back to the skill and the skating and think, okay, if he can learn the game a little bit here, there's an exciting talent there, especially if you're not talking about a top 10 pick. Like maybe there's some value if he's available kind of in the late teens, which is where I have him at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it is very interesting to me with him because there is, I think the word I would use with his game that I've been missing is maturity. Like in the not, I don't mean that in like critical as a person way, but like just the way
I think there is a little bit of that. Obviously, people got burned at the NTDP, but you do hear about sort of a little bit of immaturity in the kid as well.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of on the ice play, there does seem to be that. And I mean, I don't know. I was kind of excited to see him at Arizona State this year. I think that's a really up and coming program. I've been to that rink. The fans are crazy. You know, it's a pretty nutty place to play. And it's an improving program, like significantly over the last few years. They've been really putting in a lot there. And he'll play minutes. And, you know, I feel like being, I believe, the youngest player in NCAA. I know Boumadjen's there. I'm not sure. Actually, maybe Boumadiene might be younger, but second youngest player in the NCAA. I think that also carries some level of value, right? Like if he were a freshman next year, where would he be? I think that's an interesting question. And I'm always a fan of guys who voluntarily or whatever put themselves in a tougher level of competition to test themselves. And I think that's an interesting thing with him as well to keep an eye on. But we'll see. He's one that, though, I did sort of flag and have noticed this season. And you ask 10 people, you'll have 10 different opinions on him for sure. And I think the other one too. Let me just see what we're doing for time. You're welcome to stick around as long as you want or as long as you can.
Yeah, just trying to get this story out here, and then I've got no time limits. Frankly, I'm
okay.
Apologies for my me being sort of in and out here, though.
I totally get it. We're doing it live. It happens.
We're getting the Elliot Friedman treatment on the Jeff Merrick show. Which is
you
cool.
mentioned on the list of the juiciest players out there. You put LJ Mooney on that list, and we're talking about Americans here and there, but I could talk about him all day.
Yes.
But unfortunately, he's injured. I don't know if you have a better idea of a sort of timetable on that, but that was pretty gruesome.
It's not near term. I think he's going to miss at the end of the month. We've got the CHL USA Prospects Challenge, and I don't think the expectation is that he'll be participating in that, which is very, very disappointing for him, because I think that could have been an important showcase for him, for NHL scouts, to see him against that level of competition.
Yeah, so you have him, I think, at the top of your second round, which I think is 36. So that makes a ton of sense to me on paper. I think that there's a lot to work with there, that it kind of alleviates the concerns of a 5'7" player, especially in a world where guys like Cam Schmidt are also a similar sized player and available in this class. Maybe we just do that a little bit. I mean, we have Schmidt in the same region, but those two players are very small. They're very rambunctious at times. What are your thoughts on maybe leading with Mooney, considering that I have him a lot higher than you do, but that's only because I see a player who I think is small but could buck that trend and could be a really good value pickup at some point in the draft because of just the intensity and skill and offensive potential there.
Yeah, so I had Mooney sort of in the late 20s, early 30s, like edge of the back end of the first round in my preseason list, and then obviously downgraded him to 36 on this list. So he's now sort of early second rounder in terms of grade on my list. Part of that is just the injury, and part of that is what the injury means for him as a player specifically. Other players get injured. It's not going to impact who they are as players or where they're at in their development. It is critical that he put on weight. I'm going to begin. I'm planning to ask and sort of get the insight on whether he's even in the gym. It's been on my to-do list, and I've wanted to talk to Brian Galvin, who's the strength and conditioning coach at the NTDP and the coaching staff there, about whether he's able to work out while he's off. But he is one of the skinniest, tiniest players I've ever seen. He is skinnier and tinier than the Hudson brothers were at the same age, than Schmidt is, than Adam Benash is. You see him in real life, and he actually looks like a child. And I think teams are like alarmed by that when they see him, because it really is skin and bones. And on top of it being skin and bones, he's like 5'7". So that's tough. Like, teams still have horror stories to tell about Rocco Grimaldi and him not like guys that they thought were going to work out at that size that just never did. Now there are obviously the Logan Stankovens and everybody else. And I think those guys are a more compelling case for Mooney than Rocco Grimaldi is against him. But in saying that, the player, he's one of, I say it in my actual report on him in the ranking, but Mooney is one of the best players at this moment in this draft class. Like, if you were putting together a team of 20 kids in this draft class and building he's absolutely on my roster.
Well, his under 18 was amazing. Like, I thought he was
excellent. He was excellent. And he was playing center.
Yeah.
It's impressive that he's as effective as he is as centerman at his size, and that he was doing it last year while playing up an age group. And part of that is because he's an excellent skater, one of the better skaters in the draft. But the most important part of it is just the smarts and the know-how and the stick-to-itiveness, and that piece of the puzzle gets very high grades. And I actually think NHL scouts are like, he's not typically these smaller guys are so polarizing. I don't think him and Schmidt are polarizing at all, honestly. Right. I think people have a ton of respect for them. It's just a question of when do you pull that trigger? And when people's jobs are on the line with their first round picks, it becomes really, really hard. Especially if this kid's going to miss a good chunk of the season here, which he already basically has. So that piece of it complicates it, but awesome player, so smart, great skater, quick hands, obviously was the name coming into the program. He torched that Pittsburgh elite Penguins team. They were really excited about him. They were hopeful that he would grow. He's obviously from the Cooley family. Logan's his cousin. They live on the same street, yada, yada, yada. But that whole Cooley family is small. And so I think there was hope that he would maybe get to 5'9", and now there's doubt about whether that's going to happen. And on top of that, it seems like his metabolism is working against him because he can't put on weight. So it's a tricky evaluation. I think it's going to be hard for people all year. Even when he comes back, it's going to be a complicated one, because I'm sure he's going to look good and he's going to play well at his second U18 Worlds. And I still think they're not going to know what to do with him. And I think with Schmidt, people have a better sense of what he'll look like because of the intensity of Schmidt's game. Cooley works extremely hard and is a very reliable player, but Schmidt is like a maniac in terms of just like bouncing around the ice, working, getting up and under sticks. And then on top of that, Schmidt's a little bit stronger and a little bit more physically mature. Now, Schmidt's also a very lean kid. But yeah, it's those two and Ben Ash are complicated, no doubt about it.
For sure, yeah. Ben Ash is a very interesting one. I don't know if we want to really get into that, but he's a guy that I also have been kind of underwhelmed with this season. The transition to the USHL seems a little bit strange. I don't know if you have anything to shed light on with him.
Well, he was unbelievable in their exhibition play, which obviously doesn't get captured in his regular season stats. But they played a game against the NTDP in exhibition where he was the best player on the ice by like a country mile. And I was getting texts from scouts and USHL people saying, this kid's unbelievable. He's an incredible skater. He's so smart. And I think the skating and the smarts are still there. But the statistical profile needs to catch up in his case, because Mooney and certainly Schmidt have it. And the longer Ben Ash lingers, especially after the year he had last year, which was also underwhelming in Czechia, at least from a stats perspective. The year before that, he was obviously earth-shattering, and he's been so good at the Holinkas and all of that. But you start to wonder, if you're that size, you have to put up points. And the USHL is a very hard league. It's harder to score in the USHL than any of the 3 CHL leagues. Scoring is lower. A point per game as a 17-year-old is excellent at that level. But he's got to get there. Like he's got to put the puck in the net more than he does. And the skating and the smarts can only carry you so far if it's not producing the things that NHL teams want it to produce at that size. Like he's not he's not going to be viewed as a checker. And if he doesn't light it up, teams, whether fairly or unfairly, teams are going to have issues with him.
Yeah, I would agree. I think with him in Youngstown, it's been a weird season for him, and just the data that comes out of his games when I do those games, it's not what you would expect for a guy who is over 2 points a game with his national team this year and was so good at the Holinka and all that stuff. It's a little bit odd, the difference between those, but I do think a lot of it comes down to the way the USHL is. Like you said, it is more difficult to score, but the players are more physical. The speed of the game is a little higher. And I just feel like him dealing with that, it's been a little tricky. Like when he has the puck and some room to play with, he looks awesome. But that's not how hockey is often played. And that's when he kind of faces challenges. And I think that's where kind of the issue is. Like his data coming out of games is a lot more off puck. Like he's a lot more just, I'm going to go to the net. I'm going to find rebounds. I'm going to get fed the puck in front of the net, as opposed to like controlling the flow of the game going one way or the other. You know, he's kind of more of a complimentary guy right now, which is kind of odd. That's not really what I expected out of him, but he just doesn't have that next step of quickness or that next step of agility that unlocks a lot of doors for him. I don't know. That's just what I've seen. It's a little strange.
Yep. No, I think that's absolutely fair. He's he's still figuring it out over here. And the USHL, like as I mentioned, the USHL is a very, very, very hard league. I think we don't talk about that enough. Scoring in the USHL is really, really hard. And frankly, in that conference in particular.
Right. Okay, so before we go on to just banging through some questions the chat has, I do, before last time we spoke after we hung up, I remember you were saying there was some stuff you wanted to get to. So I'm wondering if there's any of that before we move on to questions, stuff that you wanted to hit before we go, stuff you want to plug before we get into questions. I'll give you a second to take control, and then we'll get into some of the chat stuff.
No, nothing really to plug. I mean, obviously, there's a lot coming up that I'm excited about. The CHL USA Prospects Challenge is going to be awesome, and I'll be all over it in London and Oshawa. And then I'm headed tomorrow to the last 2 days of U17 Worlds. I'll be in Sarnia for the semis in the medal round, and we'll have some coverage on that. I don't know if your listeners and viewers are familiar, but there's this young kid named Landon DuPont that I'll have a feature coming on next week that I've been working on for a year. that I think your types of listeners will really enjoy. And then we're right into selection camps in Ottawa for the World Juniors and all that. So we're right into the thick of it now.
Yeah, it comes quick, eh?
It does. And it doesn't let up, because in August we've got Helenka and the World Junior Summer Showcase, and there isn't really the gaps in the prospect schedule that exist in the NHL schedule, frankly. Yeah, obviously Christmas is a write-off for me. So
we're doing God's work, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pop over and take a look at what people have been asking for. Someone asked about the drop-off in the draft. We kind of talked about that. Someone asked about their fantasy hockey team. You were pretty high in Konsta Helenius last year.
Yeah.
They trusted you and went with him over Yakimchuk. Please reassure this person that they're not going to regret that choice. Personally, I'm with them on this. I'm with you on this. But
I would be curious to know if that's from my fantasy ranking that I do in this fall, or whether that's from my draft ranking. Certainly draft ranking was higher on Konsta, but I would guess that I had Yakimchuk ahead from a fantasy value perspective on my fantasy ranking. Both of those players are very complicated players. It's complicated for Konsta in that he is one of many young players in Buffalo that I think over the next couple of years are going to be scrapping for minutes that don't exist on that roster, given what they've also tied up with Thompson and Cousins, and you go down the list. So that it's just tricky in Buffalo right now. They've got a lot of young guys and they're trying to get better, and the fan base is sort of getting antsy. And as a result, I think they're going to make some poor decisions on some of those kids, and they're going to play their cards wrong on some of those kids because they can't just incorporate them all at the same time.
Sure.
Which is also fair. And Yakimchuk's got a free path right now to being a PP1 defenseman or PP2 defenseman at the very least. Obviously, Sanderson's had a really nice year on the power play to start this year and has hardly produced at all at even strength, which is odd for the Jake Sanderson that we watched in his draft year, who was the opposite. But Helenius is going to figure it out. Helenius was never going to be a high-end points guy, though, and I still believe that he's had a fine start in the AHL from the games I've seen. But I think you're hoping that he becomes a 50 to 60 point center in the NHL. Yeah. And Yakimchuk, for all of his warts and all of the issues that I think Yakimchuk's going to have in the NHL, especially defensively, Yakimchuk may become a 50 to 60 point defenseman. And as a result, the value there from a fantasy perspective, I would hope that I would have said was on Yakimchuk. Though if I didn't, then I apologize.
We'll just say either way, you'll be fine. There we go.
Yes.
Thoughts on Justin Carbonneau? Someone asked about him. I know we mentioned him before the show in private. To me, he's all skill. To me, like super good one-on-one skill guy, probably among the better in the draft. But what are your thoughts on Carbonneau? Because he's a guy you have higher than I have him right now.
One of the things that's impressed me and surprised, I would have said the same to you this time a year ago, but one of the things that's really impressed me, and that was the very first thing out of his coach's mouth when I was on the phone with his head coach in Blainville a couple of weeks ago, was that he is a really strong kid and he plays through contact extremely well. He absorbs hits. He's getting to the net. He's getting to the inside. I think that piece of it, the development of that piece of it, and apparently he was always a strong athletic kid, but maybe didn't use it the right way. This year, I think he's really he's heavy on pucks, and that has elevated his projection for me a little bit here. I think his line mate, Mathieu Nobert, who wasn't on my list, is going to be a mid-round pick as well, and has had a really, really positive start to the year. Was like one of the last cuts for my honorable mentions for my list this week. But the two of them have taken some important steps together this season and have been a top line in the QMJHL. And obviously Fouch and the other piece of that line is one of the best 20-year-olds in the league. So he helps, but it's been good to see Carbonneau just look strong and heavy on pucks. That's what sort of elevated him from where he began the year for me, which was kind of 30s, sort of into the late teens, early 20s kind of conversation for me at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think skill-wise, and I think that part of that strength and everything comes from how willing he is to challenge guys when the puck's on his stick. Like, he just barrels into guys and can try to make plays under that pressure, which I respect. But yeah, I have him a bit lower than you, but I totally see what you're getting at with him. Someone mentions that the chances of Canadian universities trying to compete with the NCAA or join the NCAA, I don't think that's going to happen. the gap is way too wide.
And the NCAA has always said to U Sports and to Canadian universities about that question that if you guys want to join, it's not going to be a one-team thing. It's going to be an entire conference.
Right.
So we need not just one U Sports team that's of the caliber and quality and facilities that exist in NCAA hockey. I think they would want like at least six teams that they believe are of that like of the NCAA standard in order to make that move. Like, and that just does, I mean, there are a couple out west, but the problem then is geographic, right? You've got a couple in Alberta that are really strong. You've obviously got the University of New Brunswick that's really strong. Those teams from a financial standpoint can't play in the same college hockey conference. No. So I just think that's a question that, like, I think it's never going to happen. I would be surprised.
I think it's been explored too, like years and years ago. I feel like I remember like UBC being a team that thought about going to the NCAA and they said no. I don't really recall exactly what happened there, but maybe I'm misremembering from this was maybe 15 years ago or something like that, I just back when I was in university, like those days, I feel like there was something percolating there, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Thoughts about Simon Edvinsson's NHL start. I'll be honest, I have not seen much of the Red Wings this year, and I'm not sure if you've seen much of Edvinsson, but I haven't really checked in on him. So feel free if you have anything better to say than me saying nothing.
I've watched a couple of Red Wings games this year. Just two actually. The one against, did they? Maybe just two. He's been positive this year. He was positive, frankly, last year. I thought last year he looked like a second pairing defenseman for them. And the question sort of entering this year was, can he be trusted to play a third pairing role or a second pairing role? Or is he still a second player, or can he be trusted to play a second pairing role, or is he still a third pairing guy at this stage in his career? And I think slowly over time, he's going to answer that. I'm not sure whether it's been emphatic here yet. Certainly there are others, though, who've also been drafted in that range who haven't been emphatic in their own right. Simon Nemec has been a healthy scratch recently. David Jiricek and his pivots are still an issue. Edvinsson's got it, though, defensively, I think, which is actually a little bit of the reverse of what I initially saw in his 100%. Draft year when the hands at that size popped so much and he was dancing guys. And there was like almost this Rasmus Dahlin feel of him where he was walking guys and pulling pucks through his feet and all of that. That has really taken a back seat to the rest of his game, which has become about his length and his physicality and taking away time and space and becoming a really good defender, which has been great for him. So, and part of that is, I think, out of necessity and the realization that Moritz Seider is there as a power play guy, and there are always going to be skilled young guys. Axel Sandin Pellikka is coming and is going to be more of a priority in terms of a power play role for that team long term. And so he, I think, realized that he might get PP2 snips, but he's mostly just going to be a penalty killer and a really, really solid transitional two-way 5-on-5 defenseman. I still think he's on that track. And those are very valuable players. Like those are guys who make $6-7 million in the NHL these days.
Yep. Very serviceable dude.
Quickly, currently he's playing on the top pair with Moritz Seider.
There you go.
Not
bad. Someone asked about if the flip of players going to college happens immediately or if some wait a bit to decide. For me, I think it happens real fast. I think colleges are going to come hard, like fast, and just go right at them and try to recruit. But I don't know if you have anything better than that.
I will say there was a little bit of pullback when I asked NCAA coaches for this story that's now out about, is it going to be an avalanche? Like, is it going to be a mass exodus? And they said, look, we're not convinced that the 20-year-olds are all that, the good 20-year-olds that aren't going to the AHL or ECHL are all that good anyways. Whether they've put up 90 or 100 points or not, we're not convinced that they're going to be impact players at this level. And B, there are only so many programs that those kids will be interested in anyways. Like, I don't think we're talking about Big Ten and Hockey East schools that are going to be after these kids. I don't think Lindenwood and some of those smaller programs, Mercyhurst, you name them, I don't think they're going to be pulling a lot of these kids because these kids are going to be happy in some cases to still play U Sports. B, you're going to enter the workforce. C, you're going to go over to Europe, go to the ECHL. The other paths that have existed for years still exist for these kids. And then the other thing that a lot of people, an alarming number of people in the CHL pointed out to me, is that a lot of them aren't going to have the grades. So and post-secondary education is not for everybody. So I think that is going to be a wake-up call for some of these kids. Obviously, there are stories of that. Eli Tolvanen had to decommit from going to BU because he couldn't get in from a grades perspective. Matvey Gridden was the same story this year in terms of going to Shawinigan. He didn't have the grades, or at least grades that Michigan ultimately wasn't happy with. So that's a piece of it too, is that NCAA isn't for everybody from a talent standpoint, but it's also not for everybody just from a life standpoint. Some of these kids have been away for 4 years already, and they're going to make the decision to stay home and be closer to family that they haven't been around. And all of those real life things are going to come into the equation. But in saying that, once NIL money starts getting thrown at the top kids, and once they get into some of these rinks and see the atmosphere, it's obviously, unquestionably, NCAA hockey is a huge draw.
Yeah, for sure. Someone asked about Cameron Reed, who I see you have at 28. I have him in a similar range, and I'm a much bigger fan of Cameron Reed than I thought I would be going into this season. And what I saw of him last year, it feels like he's really taken a step in terms of being more assertive and more aggressive and more like taking more control of the ice and pushing guys onto their heels. But you've said similar things about him as well. But he's a guy who's climbing quick, and I was not expecting this out of him. But where do you come down on him?
Cam's been awesome this year.
Yeah.
One of the bright stories of this season so far for me. He has the puck on his stick all game in Kitchener. He's involved in everything they do offensively and defensively. His skating is high end. I know him and his agency were a little disappointed that his listing came in at 5'11" and a half and not 6 feet, because they thought he was 6 feet, and that does matter. But other than not being a big kid, he looks like a modern defenseman to me when I watch him, in terms of how if I were a coach at the junior level or pro level, how I would want players to play. And it's the way that he does, where it's active, it's involved, it is glued to your hip through neutral ice. He's got escapability, great skater, obviously. There's a lot to like about Cam. I don't know whether the offense that he's had shown early on this season, in terms of like above a point per game, is the kind of offense that we're going to be seeing at the end of the year. Like, I don't think he's a 70-80 point defenseman in the OHL this season. And I'm not even sure he's like a natural PP1 type at all either. Like, we're not talking about, and he would be ranked accordingly, but we're certainly not talking about Brant Clark or Zane Parekh, those types here, right? Yeah. Like, it doesn't pop that way, but the skating does allow him to influence a lot of what happens on the ice. And that's the way that the game is trending, especially if you're not 6'3", 6'4".
Totally. Someone asked if we think that McKenna's going to play pro hockey next year somewhere like Austin Matthews did. I feel like that's an extreme long shot. Probably not, because it never happens. It's happened one time, but I doubt it.
And it happened one time with a player who wasn't Canadian. The CHL has a way of getting its grips around these players, and I think he's going to be told that Medicine Hat can contend this year and next year. Obviously, Medicine Hat's start has been underwhelming. A lot of that has to do with Caden Lindstrom's absence, and then also Richie's injury. But they're not built just for this year. I think Caden Lindstrom's going to be back next year. I think Richie's going to be back next year. Yeah. They've given themselves in Medicine Hat a window here, and I think they're going to plainly go to him and say, whether you put up 140 points or not, this is going to be positive for you to be in this environment. We're going to go chase a Memorial Cup. And then 10 years from now, you're going to come back and we're going to put your banner in the rafters in Medicine Hat. And those things matter. It's the same reason that Regina Pats didn't trade Connor Bedard at the deadline when they could have for a haul. It's because he went to them and said, look, I want to be a lifelong Pat. I want to have my banner in the rafters here someday. I'm happy with my billet family. We don't need to upend that just to prove something to people. Like, he's going to be the first overall pick next year, whether he's in the WHL or in Europe. Now, maybe going and playing pro hockey in Europe or something like that could be positive for him in terms of a bigger challenge. But he's also, you see him in real life, and he's another kid who needs to get in the gym. And I'm not sure he'd be 100%. As ready for that as people maybe just suppose, because of his skating and his talent. So no, I just fully expect him to be in Medicine Hat and to put up 130, 140 points next year, and that'll be it.
Right. Someone asked if Carson Bjarnason's hot start puts him in a spot for maybe making the World Junior team in Canada. I feel like he'll be there.
I think it puts him in line to get invited to selection camp for sure. Right. obviously this summer it was Ravensbergen and Ratzlaff. And those were kind of the guys that everybody was zeroing in on. Ratzlaff's obviously a returnee. I think Ratzlaff has played, he hasn't been great, but he's played well enough that he's going to be a returnee on this team. Yeah. And then they've got decisions to make about everything else. The problem with Bjarnason is that he was bad in his U18s, and rightly or wrongly, Hockey Canada does remember how guys have played for them. Now, right. Bjarnason was also injured in that tournament, which derailed him, got an awkward hit to the head kind of thing, and then didn't play the rest of the tournament. But even before that had happened, he just hadn't looked like himself. And I think that kind of put Hockey Canada maybe a little off of him in terms of big game moments and that kind of thing, which they obviously care about. And then who's the name is escaping me, which rarely happens here, but who's the kid in Owen Sound who was the U18 goalie last year? Last name starts with a C.
Oh, Carter George.
Carter George, or first name starts with a C. Yeah, Carter George, Kings prospect. Carter George was outstanding for them at U18 Worlds, and that is going to linger for the same reasons. And Jack Ivankovic has been unbelievable for Hockey, like lights out for Hockey Canada. So you start to add them up, and you've got George, and you've got Ratzlaff, and you've got the two kids from this year's draft, Ravensbergen, and I think Ivankovic has played his way into a selection camp invite as well. Yep. And then even Evan Gardner's been great.
I love Evan Gardner.
Evan Gardner has been great. So yeah, there's a list of 5 or 6 guys, and they're only going to invite 4. They only ever invite 4. Sometimes they only invite 3. They might invite 5, but not all of those guys are going to be there. Is Bjarnason? Probably, I would say. That's selection camp, not necessarily the team. I think he could make the team too, but no guarantees on the team.
Yeah. Joel Henderson of Puck Preps fame and WHL Mastermind is here, and he said that he expects some BCHL teams already want to make the jump to the WHL. We'll see how that goes. I feel like that's a possibility, but
for what it's worth, and this is in my story, it might be in my story, might not be in my story. I don't think Penticton is one of those teams at the present time. That doesn't mean that Penticton won't. They're the one everybody goes to, obviously.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they won't end up in the WHL. I think that's a very real possibility over the next couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it is. But at the moment, I think Penticton was kind of at the center of the BCHL's breakaway, and I think they're still committed to trying to make that work.
Yeah. I'd be very curious to see what happens there. Like, whether it's a bigger market like Victoria, they jump up. I don't know. But I guess Penticton is the easy answer. But if it's not them, then we'll see. Okay. I haven't seen much of this tournament yet. I have been supposed to, but I haven't seen it yet. But is there anyone that's standing out from the U17 if you have seen them that you want to highlight, or is that something you want to wait until you see them in person?
No, I've watched a couple of the games through the new streaming service that Hockey Canada has. I hate that I have to pay for it now, but we all hate how many streaming services we have to pay for, and here we are. I also work at The Athletic, where we also ask people to pay for our content, so I shouldn't be talking about paywalls, I suppose. But no, I mean, there's the two mutants. They're the guys who always attract me, and by mutants, I mean Belchets and Rubrowick, who you cannot miss the two of them on the ice. Teams are, rightly or wrongly, again, teams are always attracted to those guys. There's a reason that teams are head over heels with Porter Martone. There's a reason that they loved Cole Baudouin and how big and strong he was last year. There's a reason that they're excited about the idea of Roger McQueen and Anton Salayev, and those guys check those boxes. Belchets, obviously, Ethan is off to an excellent start with Windsor. And Rubrowick as well with Niagara. And those are two very good players who are big boys. So easy to be drawn to them. Landon goes without saying. Landon's been excellent. Underage captain, yada, yada, yada. The skating is just unbelievable. His ability to defend at 5'10". I think Landon is like, I think we're talking about a Cale Makar, Adam Fox level talent here already at 15 years old. That's how good he is. And it's not the offensive game that gives me that belief. It's how unbelievably good he's been playing 24, 25 minutes a night in Everett, and his ability to defend. Just so smart, and the skating is so strong already. So that's exciting. The other, I mean, the Verhoff and Valentini, and there's some big names there that have been good. The Ruck twins have actually disappointed me a little bit,
Okay.
not just in this tournament from what I've seen, but also in Medicine Hat. It's hard at that size to pop like they did, say, at the Youth Olympics. Ryan Lynn looks like a player. His agency's kind of been all over me on him, so I try not to get carried away with that because we all know how agents are. But
sure,
Lynn looks like a player. It's a good group. The next two age groups really for Hockey Canada are going to be strong, and that's coming out of a run of obviously we've had Owen Power and Connor Bedard, but really a run of the U.S. challenging Canada on an NHL draft scale at the very top of these last several drafts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Someone asked about Jackson Smith and Logan Hensler being polar opposites. I mean, I can kind of see where they're coming from on that, but I feel like, I mean, I'm a big Jackson Smith fan, but I know why people might not be as much of a fan as I am. I just think that the potential in his game is enormous, but definitely some issues. Whereas Hensler, I do kind of see maybe some of the things that Smith is not super strong with, that he's more more of a strength, but then more deficient, where Smith, I think, is a bit more of an advantage. But I guess quickly, like, where do you see those two guys and where they differ?
Well, I don't think they're polar opposites. Smith has certainly has the body in terms of his physical makeup that Hensler's a big, strong, athletic kid. So this isn't meant to say that, but Smith looks like a man. So there's that piece that differs them. And then just the activity level and Smith's kind of boldness on the ice, I think really differentiates him. Hensler, I think, lost a little bit of that. There were times very early on in his career at the NTDP where Hensler was involved in everything and confident and aggressive. And then I think that actually got beaten out of him a little bit by the staff there. And because Cole Hudson was their like dynamic offensive guy, I think the coaching staff basically told the other six guys on that defense to cool it a little bit. And they were taught to one touch on the line and then the puck's in. They were not going to E-to-D in the offensive. Like, that coaching staff treated that blue line, which was a rough blue line, frankly, other than Hudson and Emery certainly emerged to become a really important player for them. But it was a weaker group. And I think Hensler, just the coaching and him weren't necessarily a good fit. And then he goes to Wisconsin, which is a program in flux that's had a really rough go over the last few years, even under a now excellent coach. And the points haven't been there, I think, maybe like people thought they were going to be, in terms of he is running the power play. Was running the power play there. He was actually injured last weekend. He had suffered an upper body injury on Saturday. And I haven't checked back in with that program about whether it's a long-term thing or he just came out of the game kind of thing. But Hensler's a great skater. Smith, I think, has all of the strong skating elements as well. There's a lot to like about both of those kids. The biggest difference between them is just the confidence and the boldness in Smith's game that is hard to teach. Like, he just wants to take charge and make shit happen. And I think Hensler I think Hensler wants that as well. He doesn't like it. I think everybody is just waiting for Hensler to really grab it and take hold of who he is as a player. And I think he just has a bit of an identity crisis at times. But certainly Hensler's got a ton of tools. There's lots to like in Hensler. I have Hensler higher than Smith at the moment.
Right.
But no, it's the mentality. Like, Smith just seems like he feels himself out there at times, maybe a little bit too much at times.
I was just going to say, for better or worse, that's what he does. That's what it is. All right, we got a couple of more. Someone asked about Eric Nilsson. I am on the record of being a huge Eric Nilsson fan. He's in your honorable mentions. Yeah. I have him really high. I thought he was excellent at the Holinka. I thought things broke for him finally when it mattered in that bronze medal game, scoring a hat trick. Whenever I've seen him with Djurgården this year, him and Arvid Drott playing together have been excellent. I'm curious of where you come down on him right now, because I think he's been one of the most unheralded guys in the draft so far this year.
He kind of reminds me of the way that Felix Unger-Sorum kind of creeped up on everybody. And as obviously Unger-Sorum is now like one of Carolina's very best prospects. And I think there are frankly, a lot of similarities in their two games in terms of the finesse piece and the way that they think it and the way that they read it offensively and the way that they even operate on the ice with the puck on their stick. I think there's a little bit of Noah Östlund in both of those players as well. Although I do have concerns about Noah's game and whether it's going to translate in terms of an NHL player. But no, I mean, Eric's awesome. I just wonder, my wonder with Eric is, are we going to see him in pro games this year? And if we don't see him in pro games, how confident is anybody going to be in taking that player type in terms of like a top 40, top 30 kind of conversation? Is he a second, third round candidate for me? Absolutely. Obviously, my list is 64 plus 26 honorable mentions. So he's a top 90 guy for me, and would have been, if the list extended past 64, would have been in the late 60s or early 70s kind of thing. Like he was among the 7 or 8 guys that were closest to cracking it. But no, he's had a great start in J20, and now it's about sort of proving it over a long period of time here and becoming one of their top guys with that U18 team. And his 5 Nations is going to be important. His U18 Worlds is going to be important. Like a lot like Ungersorum and Östlund, like he's just going to have to keep showing people that he's the real deal kind of thing.
Right. I mean, just for the record, I believe that if there are injuries to the pro team, he's one of the earlier guys that might get a call. But I know there's talk of maybe being a college player at some point, maybe, but also if the NCAA rules are kind of shifting, then there might be more leeway with that. So it's still, I think there's a strong possibility that he lands himself in that lineup at some point, but time will tell. So we'll finish on this. Someone asked about Michael Hage getting an invite to Canada's camp for the World Junior, but
no chance.
Not a right.
No chance. No chance. If they didn't invite him literally 6 months ago to play for them at U18 Worlds, there's no chance they're inviting him to come to selection camp with how deep that roster is. They could make 2 teams of players, and I'm still not sure he'd be an important part of either one of them. And that is not me saying anything about Michael Hage as a player, but Michael Hage is playing to make the 2026 team in Minnesota. He is not playing to make the 2025 team in Ottawa.
On that note, we'll finish with this. Where do you fall on where these, I know it's still early, we've got a month or 2 months to go until the gold medal's handed out, but who's your priority in terms of teams for the World Junior? Who are you keeping your eye on? Who are you curious about? I mean, I get the feeling Canada's going to have a heck of a team, like you just said. US, I'm not so sure, but definitely.
If the U.S. gets Will Smith, the U.S. is going to be a wagon as well. Obviously, the story of the tournament, I think, is the fact that U.S. has never repeated back-to-back golds at the World Juniors, and they have an opportunity to do that this year. Are they the betting favorites going in? No. This Canadian team will be much stronger than the team that disappointed in Gothenburg and lost in the quarterfinals last year. I think you will see some big names left off of this Hockey Canada team. When we've begun to put together our mock, it is tough. We're going to see players like T.J. Ginla and Andrew Crystal and Riley Height potentially left off the team. They're going to be deep down the middle. Obviously, Callum Ritchie is going to be a huge part of that. They've got several returnees in Carson Rakoff, Matthew Wood, who's had an unbelievable start at Minnesota. That they're going to, Easton Cowan's obviously back, Braden Yager's back, Jet Luchenko played NHL games this year. All of those guys are going to be a part of the conversation here. I think guys like Colby Barlow, you go down the list, guys that have been off to slow starts have zero chance of making this year's team. It's going to be a really, really strong team. I think and then you look at the blue line, like it's Sam Dickinson, it's Zane Perek, it's a returnee in Tanner Molendyk, who obviously didn't get to participate last year due to injury. It's a returnee in Oliver Bonk. Even their depth guys a little further down, Harrison Brunicky, I think, has played his way into the conversation. Noah Chadwick plays for Pete Anholt, who runs the team in Lethbridge. I think if Pete Anholt weren't involved in the team, that Noah Chadwick wouldn't be a part of the conversation, but I think that he very much is a part of the conversation. Sawyer Minio could be a third pairing number 7 guy for them and looked good with Zane Perek at the World Junior Summer Showcase. Carter Yakimchuk obviously impressed at Ottawa's camp this year, though I think Carter has some warts and they'll have to make a decision of whether they want both Carter and Zane and who's going to run the power play and all of that. Dickinson's obviously had an unbelievable start offensively as well and has really transformed his game over the last 2 years offensively. But there's a lot to sink your teeth into there. The difference between the two teams, especially if the Americans get Will Smith back from the Sharks, which I think is a real possibility with the way Smith has struggled in the NHL to start this year, and because Greer, his GM, is American and has been involved in USA Hockey and I think cares about gold medals for USA Hockey. Obviously, you'll have the reunion, the final reunion potentially ever of the Perreault, Leonard, Smith line, which will be the best line in the tournament without question. I didn't even mention Gavin McKenna and Porter Martone and Matthew Schaefer, who I think all have opportunities to make the team. I actually think Porter Martone is going to be on the team. We'll see. McKenna will probably be on the team, despite obviously very rare for a 16-year-old to be on that team. Schaefer, we'll see. He's got to play more games here. But the American team, the big differentiator for them, for me, is going to be Trey Augustine, who is going to be leaps and bounds the best, most qualified goalie in this tournament. And where is Canada typically vulnerable at this thing? It's typically in net, right? So there have been exceptions. Devin Levi and Joel Hofer had some good tournaments recently. But no, it's going to come down to if Ratzlaff or Carter George or whoever it is can be good enough, Canada should be the favorite. But that American line could score 3 goals in a period and crack open a gold medal game for sure. And even beyond them, Oliver Moore, Danny Nelson, Zeev Boyum's going to play 30 minutes a night for them on the blue line. Trey Augustine can steal a game. That American team is going to be strong. James Haggins will be the second line center behind Will Smith. I know they're hopeful to potentially get Trevor Connolly back healthy. Quentin Musty is finally going to be on that team. They're going to be the Americans will be a real challenge.
Yeah. I mean, before I let you go, we did get one last message from a dedicated viewer who really loves goaltenders almost too much and says that Axels Ozols of Latvia is definitely going to clear Trey Augustine. So pretty sure that's a joke, but go Latvia, go. The better Latvia does, the better the world does. We
have Kazakhstan's return too.
Dude.
Mark Masters is going to be all over the Kazakhstan stories.
I'm going to be all over Kazakhstan. I love Kazakhstan. I think they're just a hoot. And that under-18 team this past spring was kind of fun to watch. They were kind of a scrappy group of guys.
I have heard that because they're back in the U18 loop this year, that it could be very, very ugly for them because the core of that team is all no longer obviously eligible to play for that team due to age, and apparently the age group behind them is rough sledding. So it could be sloppy. Yeah, you're not wrong. It's going to be, and that's part of what all of these tournaments have lost without Russia and Belarus, who could have had some players at this over the course of the last couple of years. Even in Belarus's case, I just don't think, you name it, Norway, Austria, Kazakhstan, I don't think they're quite there yet.
No, they're not there yet. So time will tell. But go Kazakhstan, go Latvia, whatever. But probably not going to be meddling when you look at the teams like Canada and the U.S. But anyway, Scott, thank you so much for hopping on. It's always lovely to have you. Thanks for sticking around for so long. You had great insight and everything. It's going to be very interesting future for hockey in Canada, especially. So if you have any parting words, feel free. But thanks so much. It's always a pleasure.
That's it. Cheers.
All right. Sounds good.